Amazing. So delighted to be here at South by Southwest. We're going to talk a bit about innovation in a nervous system. But before I get in, I'll set some context and talk a little bit about nervous systems. But I think good to just get everyone introduced. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves in a sec. I'm Tom. I'm a senior director at Truth, and my background is qualitative research, but I've been spending years blending research, culture, and the latest kind of innovative methods to look at innovation, working with clients across the innovation process. So I'm really excited to talk about where it's going and how it's changes, because we've certainly noticed a lot of flux and change in the process and the way we've been working in innovation. So super excited. Why don't we start off with Joe, and then Emily, you can introduce yourselves a bit. Is that right?
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. Morning, everyone. Joe Spence. I've sort of worked for the last 15 years in innovation across consultancy and client side. So includes 10 years over at Diageo, leading different innovation teams, and most recently Innocent Drinks, including heading up their innovation function as well. And last 2 years been working sort of more flexibly, supporting clients across the world of chocolate, alcohol, vertical farming, salad leaves, you name it. So that's a bit about me.
This is going to work. Hi, I'm Emily at Dent. I'm a partner at Innovation and Transformation Consultancy and us. And I guess what I should tell you is I'm obsessed with the idea of how natural systems can teach us about how to live in the 21st century, including in how we should think about innovation and what our organisations should be structured like in order to cope with what we're seeing now and what we're probably going to experience for the next at least 50 years, I reckon. So I've been spending my time geeking out massively, particularly around how mushrooms can teach us about the future.
Amazing, great. Well, let's start off with a bit of an introduction and a bit of context setting. So nervous systems is one of the disruptions we've been talking about. And it's born out of this idea that I think we're kind of quite familiar with now, the idea of we're in a sort of state of perma-crisis. So post-coronavirus, we've seen kind of lurching from crisis to crisis, whether that be economic, political, or even all-out war in some cases. And that has created this kind of environment that feels quite unstable as a result. We're lacking kind of confidence and stability, and created a bit of a mood. And in its most extreme, I guess, a form of panic and anxiety. And nowhere is that more relevant than the world of innovation. Traditionally, we're bound to kind of a project cycle that would be 18 months to a couple of years. And that was connected when we had a lot more stability, when we were a lot able to kind of afford that kind of time. But now that kind of system feels a little bit antiquated. It feels like it's not going to be able to keep up. There's a risk, I guess, overall, that kind of system could lead to creating something that feels irrelevant by the time it's landed or that it's out there. So, yeah, really interesting to think about nervous systems. And I think, first of all, it would be good to talk about how we think nervous systems and these disruptions have impacted and disrupted the way we innovate and the innovation process. We kick off there, talk a bit about that.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think you've touched on a few things there, Tom, which are really, really interesting. I think we are at an inflection point when it comes to how legacy organisations and corporates think about innovation. So I think the tensions we're seeing is we need to have teams that can be more agile, that can create more really genuine answers to consumer-led problems, needs, desires. Yet at the same time, to your point, we're operating in legacy systems with processes, ways of working, which were designed for a plan to act when things were more predictable. And I think that's the tension we're seeing. And some of the things, obviously, in terms of burnout, we're seeing around people and teams. I don't think it's ever been higher. So I think that's the natural tension and what we're observing out there at the moment. And we'll come on to talk about some of the solutions as well. But it's one of the observations.
Yeah, thanks, Jay.
I think my take is we've always lived in systems. The idea of systems thinking started in the 1950s. This is not new ideas that we're talking about. What's interesting is we're suddenly rediscovering them, or they are suddenly meaningful today. And I think that's happening for a couple of reasons. I think the cost of innovation has been massively democratized. We know that. We know that you can start a global brand from your sofa, and AI is accelerating the cost democratization of starting new things. And I think that's panicking legacy organizations who have managed thus far really to control what gets taken to market. So that is a panic. I think the other thing is we all have attention deficit. We are bombarded. I know it's one of your other disruptions, but I love this phrase, the moral obesity, which I think is such a beautiful way of describing it. We're bombarded by fear the whole time. We're never good enough. The next thing that's come along, you're accessing all of this information in real time. That wasn't the case before. So our feeling is that the things have changed. Because of the democratization of technology, it means that the butterfly effect in systems, you can feel more dramatically faster. So that is true. We're exposed to the complexity in systems much more readily now than we were in the past. That doesn't mean that they didn't exist in the past. We were just willfully blind. It was a kind of innocent time I would argue before 2008, actually, it was a more innocent time. And since 2008, not just since the pandemic, you've seen this rise in ability to see complexity. And that's what's giving us lots of anxiety in the system. So this kind of dual trends, I guess, or dual realities rising up and being able to see the complexity in the system, butterfly effects attacking us, if you like, more frequently, and the democratization of cost of innovation. That, I think, is what the legacy organizations are feeling. The pinch point between those two things.
Interesting, yeah. Even the role of on how we're working and how that's accelerated in the last few years. When we were talking previously, we talked about the role of tech, almost a paradoxical nature of tech. The speed at which we can work has increased. The speed at which we can communicate has increased. But we're actually squeezing the bits that really count. It's really important for the way we work and insight. The kind of critical thinking in those moments to analyse the data is so integral to how we work. But we're finding that we're having to protect those. So in the truth, we see as quite important. We protect certain times or certain periods in the week so people can have moments to think critically and deeply. But that is being sort of squidged or compressed because you're constantly on call or constantly available, which is an interesting paradox.
I think that we're going to have to be, organisations are realising, a lot of the work that we do is helping organisations restructure the way that they work on an everyday basis. So there's lots of studies, particularly with the advent of AI, about the ability to do deep work. And Microsoft did a study years ago which proved that unless you have at least 2 hours defended, you can't get to a point where you're actually solving anything. And we live in a world which is, if you look at your diary, more and more distracted, more and more disrupted in meetings that are not actually adding value. They are often just shoving information through systems or updating people, that kind of managing tasks. So I think we are seeing a shift in organisations realising that they need to be much more purposeful about how they organise people's time. So is this period of time a managing piece of time? Are we updating people? Are we managing stakeholders? Are we creating update decks? Are we managing spreadsheets? That kind of information. Or are you in a creative act? Are you discussing things? Are you sense making? Are you tangibly making things? And that space needs to be savagely defended in a world where disruption is the norm in your working life. So I think organisations will start to become much more sophisticated with the use of AI in streamlining and being really purposeful at those two modes of work.
If you look at like innovation, it's sort of like the nature of what it is non-linear. But this, like I say, so the systems, the processes, and structures treat it as a linear sort of act. So I think in terms of what the organisations I think are going to win in the future, they're going to be those ones that really create the brilliant consumer-led deep insight-led products, services, etc. The only way you can do that, to embrace that non-linearity of what we're talking about, is to create ultimately the space. To Em's point there, there'll be different ways that we can do that. I think one of the big roles leaders are going to need to play is leading the change on how we think about time boxing or creating space within some of those legacy processes to go, look, if we thought we were going over here, actually what we've learned is what the actual answer is over here. and we've got the space to be able to go and do that. So I think the role of leaders is how to actually create that space that that's not a luxury, it's a necessity to create the very best innovation out there. So I think
on something you said, because I think you said something like the acting on the insight that's happening over here, a team can access it. So I think there is if you think about that from a systems architecture perspective, how do you create the conditions for team A to know what genius team B has got in a world where most organisations are created around silos, right? That information flow doesn't happen, really. You find out things, the coffee machine has gone, that's where you used to find out about things. The level of ability to bump into people in a global context has been marginalised. So that flow of information needs to be radically thought about in a world where we used to take it for granted. So I think that's a really big question. How do you create the system for that serendipitous conversation for information A to make its way to team B? I think that's a big question.
We ran a big project, didn't we, with one of the biggest charities in the UK, and one of the principles that we're working with the teams on is about that transparency and openness of the work that was happening. So we're looking at sort of 15 big existential questions that were facing the future of the industry that this charity operated in. And actually one of the biggest transformations that we partnered with the teams on was, how do you work really openly? And that feels very vulnerable. It doesn't feel particularly safe potentially. But actually what the biggest observation and learning that came out of it was how to get that learning across more of the organisation. And the biggest observation was the teams that really didn't think they had anything to do with one of the projects that was happening actually use that insight in different ways that they wouldn't have otherwise have done if it had been happening in the silos. So in that openness and transparency, and clearly there's bigger cultural questions about how to create the environments where that feels the natural thing and safe to do so, is one of the big questions we need to be thinking about for the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of our clients are coming to us with or reporting back to us actually that they're creating lots of insight, but it doesn't go outside of the insight department. Like they can't get it, they can't socialize it. So one of the challenges they come to us with is, we need to immerse the decision makers that are going to literally drive this innovation in, and we need to expose them to people that they're going to be innovating to. And so often it will be about bringing them along, them coming along with us to an ethnographic session. In fact, we're just about to set one up in Europe soon, and it's just about bringing people along for the ride. But also, what does the end product look like? It can't be a 150 slide deck that gets sent out to the insight team that they might cut bits out of. It needs to be something that the big decision makers are going to see, and that might be a different format, that might be a shorter format, or it might be like a short video. But we're finding more and more there's this hunger for it and the need for it, because they're not seeing it.
I think that's cut through. So I can't remember when it was, maybe 10 years ago, that we were talking about being back in the age of experience. And I think that is true. That's so true now. The only way to cut through all the noise is to be much more human. There's a kind of irony in, you guys are the trends experts, but there's an irony for me in the rise of AI and the rise of craft. People are desperate to have human experiences again in a world where we are separated from each other. There's a loneliness pandemic, all of these things are fascinating, and the only thing that cuts through is, do I really feel it? So I would argue that the age of leadership that we're going to go into is going to be more human, way more human than we've seen in our lifetimes. Obviously we're still really young, so our lifetimes are short. But I think that's true. I think humans are going to have to learn to be really, really human, and be really, really good at being really, really human. And I think some of that is, we've lost skills of storytelling, we've lost skills of influence, we've lost that kind of immersive experience that really embodies change. So I think if you're thinking about all of these, the kind of nervous system, I was thinking about what that really means. Like, a nervous system is calmed down when you are really in it. When you're really present to a nervous system, then your sympathetic nervous system gets rid of its cortisol, the serotonin rises, and that comes from, are we really connected to an experience? So I think you're absolutely right. Leaders have got to stop just being busy, and they've got to really immerse themselves back in the businesses that they are in. So the question I always ask leaders was, how much time are you spending with customers? Like, actually, how much time are you spending with customers? Not in sales meetings, but, actually in the field, going and solving the problems that they have. Not in a call centre, although I do think leaders should all work in call centres. I think it's the biggest, richest piece of insight that you can get, see how customers are actually talking to you. Really, are you doing that? And is that the most valuable thing that you can do for your organisation in order to give people the way to see through the madness? Are we actually solving the most urgent things that customers want us to solve? Or are we busying ourselves with things that ultimately don't matter?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing it from, as always, ever the trend is more, quicker, and that's just inevitability. That's part of it. But you guys, when we talked initially, were saying that's something that you're seeing, people in these systems, these companies are expected similarly to do more in less time. So it's no wonder it's trickling down to the type of brief that we get. So is that something you're seeing on a regular basis, and you think that's a trend that's increasing, that people are expected to do more?
I think it comes. I think an observation from some of the organisations that we sort of work with, I think it comes down to prioritization, and it's really easy to say, look, we need to prioritize better and more. Like, I think the reality is, I think it's actually about a bigger point here about the relationship with uncertainty. I think when leaders are uncertain, it's much easier to keep everything on the table and just hope teams can keep up with exploring all of them and nudging them all along together. Actually, it's not just a question of blimey, can't we just prioritize better? The actual question is, like, how do we get more comfortable and curious to go and learn about uncertain things? And it comes back to your point, Em, about leaders on the front line getting really close to customer problems. That's the only way you can really get comfortable, increasing the certainty curve, which your confidence levels. And taking yourself up the confidence curve, which you talk about a lot. That's the only way you can truly do it. So, which will naturally help going, yes, this is the actual problem we're trying to solve. And a prioritization is just a facet of that. That's a result of that. So I think it's about, confidence and relationship with uncertainty as much as doing more with less.
That makes sense.
I think the additional thing I would say to that, and we're obviously still very early days in this journey as a society, is what I think will happen with AI is it will help with the transparency of data. So what I see a lot of clients do in the panic is go, you have this kind of absurd, now the most important data to know today, go get me this piece of data. That should be self-serve in the world of AI, right? That should go away and allow humans to do the thing that humans are actually brilliant at, which is surviving in uncertainty. That's literally been our entire existence, is surviving in uncertainty, and creating ways through that. So with creativity, with collaboration, not on our own. I think that's the other thing we've got to get rid of, is solo working. I think the atomic unit in an organisation has got to be recognised as a team, not an individual. So I think that, if that is really taken to the heart, and you've got AI supplementing this nonsense of where's the latest piece of data that's going to solve all our problems, which, that creates scramble in organisations. If you can get that balance right, then I think we're back to really doing meaningful things in the world. I'm not sure it will add to growth, because I don't know, that's a completely different discussion about what growth looks like now, but it will at least create simplicity where there is noise right now. That's my theory.
Interesting. We're starting to get into this, so maybe we should move into kind of ways in which we can adapt. What do you think, guys, in terms of how should brands be adapting to better cope with nervous system and the kind of flux that we're facing?
It's an interesting one. I think it's. I think it comes down to the balance. So there's this, the idea of structured adaptability. It's sort of, at the moment, I think within organisations there is what is celebrated is the pursuit of certainty, or at least creating the illusion of certainty, whether it's the polished 3-year strategies and the forecasts, etc., that go with it. And actually, if the time is actually spent on the front lines with customers, your brands are going to solve bigger problems. They're going to identify new needs and desires. They're going to grow in ways that potentially no one even knew about. But I think it's going to be. We need to free ourselves from trying to create the illusion of certainty and embrace the uncertainty, like we're talking about. And I think that will mean that brands stretch naturally. I think that will, if we're really curious and learn, I think what we're going to see is brands stretching into genuinely new white spaces much better, easier than they are at the moment. And what that means for the equity that we know brands being at the moment, that might change. That might change. Some of these FMC brands we see on grocery shelves, they might be something entirely new in 10 years. But it all comes back to this: are we really clear what the consumer problems are beyond the world about just our brand?
Yeah, I think very practically speaking, I think, so I'm going to use I know there are my fellow experts in the room, but if you think about the way that natural systems are organised, what they are organised into is sensing beings. So they don't serve the organisation. If you think about it as most organisations are actually built in replicas of humans. So you have one central brain that tells everyone else what to do. Natural systems aren't organised like that. Natural systems are organised in kind of forward-facing or boundary-facing teams that explore. And they don't have a central nervous system. No bird is going and telling the head bird what to do or what I should do. They're just doing things, right? So if you take that concept to its extreme, what you need is an organisation, and there are organisations that are doing this, have completely restructured the way that they think about their organisations, like the white goods giant Hire is a brilliant example of this. They've just gone, do you know what? If we really embrace empowering teams, we really, really embrace that idea that a team is the best, a small team of individuals whose skills are perfectly matched to launch and sustain innovation without some head honcho who's probably in a different time zone, in a completely different culture, telling them what to do. Those teams really profit. Right? They really go at the world, find new insights, find new agile ways to launch products in a way that serves the entire organisation. So you've got to stop that bottleneck. That's the only way that people are going to be able to work at pace with less stress. So we talk about we kind of use this language of playgrounds. A leader's job becomes, how do you create playgrounds for teams to thrive? And a playground, the really interesting thing about play theory, which is another thing I go and geek out about, is play is defined by the boundary, not by what's in play. So if you ask someone what the most important thing in a playground is, they'll say the slides, the swing, the blah, which in an organisational context is like my boss, the tools I have, the incentives I've given. None of that is actually what makes play good. What makes play good is, do I understand the scope of work? Do understand the boundary? If you look at what kids do when they don't understand what the boundary is, they either find a boundary, you actually put them in an empty field, what they'll do is they'll run to the edge, or they'll sit down, because guess what, the floor is a boundary. And it paralyzes them, they actually don't know what to do. But as soon as you put, and it literally happens, if you just put a rope round a bit of playground, suddenly they're totally free. They'll do whatever they like in a playground. You don't have to determine play, you don't have to tell them what to do. They just play really well because they understand what the parameters of that is. That's what we've got to do for teams. What is the scope here? What are the rules of engagement, and how can you get out the way? And if you had an organisation of teams who are structured like that, really liberated, that's where we're going to get innovation from. Not by trying to command and control anymore. It doesn't work. We don't have the time. It's really stressful. Not by trying to give commands from faraway places that you don't understand. It's that liberation I think we need to build into organisations. And at the moment, it's the thing we don't have, because in fear, we're all retrenching into command and control. And that is meaning that people are literally sitting down in organisations. Productivity is tanking, confidence is tanking. That has real world consequences that we've got to get out in front of. So I think there are really practical things you can do there. So to have leaders really define the scope and are they getting out of the way? Have you reorganised your time into managing and making time so you can do really deep work with individuals who can help you solve problems? Are you really customer facing? And are you prepared to break rules? Because it's only really in understanding what the rules of engagement are in, you know, if you think about it in consumer terms, how consumers really act and where the potential is for innovation, and you're willing to break those established norms, that's when the whole system works really well.
Fascinating.
I think and just building on everything you just said, it's sort of, I think when this is potentially much easier to do when it's sort of, you know, you're the founder, or it's, you know, a small organization and you're starting out. I think where it gets really, really interesting is when you look at the legacy organizations who, you know, we were having the conversation before we came on. If you look at the annual reports, there's a lot more conversation around innovation, need for agility, etc. How do legacy organizations do everything that Em's just talked about there? That's the really interesting part, because I think as the leaders within these organizations, like, I don't disagree with any of this. This all sounds great, but realistically, you've got
20,000 people working with me.
Exactly. Yeah. 20,000 people. I've got structures and systems and processes and ways of working that have been established over tens and tens of years. So, so I think the question of like, great, how do we start is a really, really interesting question, and I think, you know, what we probably say is start small, just get going, start small and learn as you go. So how do you create everything, you know, the boundaries, but those small cross-functional teams that naturally break the silos and pick the right problem to start with. So what's that knotty, complex problem that an individual siloed team can solve on their own? Go and attack that, and things will go well, things won't, and naturally that will unearth learnings about the organisation to do more of this at greater scale. So I think it's the message is sort of get going, pick the right challenge, and make the learnings about what works and doesn't about these new ways of working really transparent to then go and learn and do more of it in other places in the organisation.
Yeah, fascinating. I think part of that as well is having confidence in some of the theories and hypotheses that you have as a team. Yeah. It's really interesting. I think that there are a lot of them, funny enough. If you pick a stakeholder's brain, they'll often just spill the beans and there'll be loads of fascinating stuff. We're finding that is now an essential part of any project. Before we do anything, we insist on meeting stakeholders and having a conversation with them. And quite often it's quite difficult to get diaries and the purpose is questioned. But as soon as we've had the session, everyone's like, okay, I totally get this now. And it gives us this really great set of hypotheses that we can use as a bit of a North Star that we then follow throughout the process of the research. And as a result, we've kind of co-created the process and the answer. But there's loads of knowledge internally. It's just sometimes there isn't that kind of that sort of avenue or opportunity to share it. And I think there's that confidence thing, Joe, that you're talking about, having confidence to say, this is my hypothesis. I've known this brand for 5, 10, 15 years. I know, I'm pretty sure this is what I'm going to put my money on. This is what I would. But not necessarily having the confidence or the platform to be able to express it and to talk about it. So it's interesting.
I think I think it's a really important point, because it changes the entire. It's really important for leaders to go, do you know what? I don't know the answer here, but I'm pretty clear on some of my hypotheses and assumptions that we should be testing. And I think there's over years and years, and totally understandably within any organisation, there's assumptions that we hold as truths, and that the innovation work is built on to go, we can't change that. And actually, if you go, Elon Musk, whether you like him or loathe him, but he talks a lot about first principles. And actually, if you really break everything down to first principles, what you find is within organizations, there's a lot of what we believe are truths are actually assumptions. So if we get really clear on those and really highlight those, then we can actually go and test those. So these are assumptions that potentially could mean that, your product pipelines looks very similar for the last 10 years. What are those assumptions that we really, really want to be testing? And I think it means that, if you've got senior leadership talking about, actually, do you know what, I'm not sure on this, but here's my assumptions. Naturally, it'll start influencing what your culture is, and people are going to be more comfortable go, I'm uncertain on this. Let's go and test. Let's experiment. Let's go and learn. So you're going to need more and more of that in the times we're living in.
and the transparency, the conversation becomes really important. If you really believe that, and you act like nobody has the answer, there are possibilities. If you really believe that, then it's a level playing field. The leader is just as an important a voice as the intern. Everyone's looking at signals from everywhere, and it's the combination, combined knowledge that becomes really valuable. So that kind of democratization of ideation we've talked about for 20 years, but I think now is even more important. The thing that I don't think anyone has cracked is how do you do that, to your point, Joe? How do you create that knowledge, transparent knowledge bank that isn't overwhelming? You know, back to one of your other disruptions, the kind of attention deficit, moral obesity. We can't keep living in the overwhelm of information. So how is that organised? How is it transparent? How can everyone self-serve, but also how can you add to it? How can you build the stories over time? How can we be in a signalling world? That becomes an organisational problem that I don't think anyone has really cracked. Back to your point, you know, we cannot live in the world of PowerPoints and drawers anymore.
Absolutely.
It's got to die.
Amen.
It's got to go somewhere. But I don't know what the alternative is yet.
Yeah, fascinating. What about then, to sort of finish off, I guess, and talk a little bit more about any examples you think? We've mentioned a couple, but in your experience, who do you think's smashing it? Who do you think's really killing it and driving some of these adaptations in the way they work? We've talked a bit about hire, haven't we? But is there anyone else you think that are living and breathing some of this stuff, and as a result, you know, demonstrating huge success or starting to?
Well, so I think back to, well, name the organisation that we work with, because the case study is public anyway, but Macmillan. Macmillan, massive, obviously organisational success story, but facing huge change. And I think their bravery, real bravery for all sorts of different reasons to go, do you know what, we're just going to do this differently. And I think we are seeing that pay off for them now over time, but it's going to be, the next 20 years of their journey. So it's probably too early to say, commercially, is it paying off? But culturally, it's really paying off for them. So I think, but it really was the leadership team who stood up and said, no more, we're going to stop the nonsense. We're going to do this a completely different way that anyone had tried before. They were really extreme. And I think that is real testament to that leadership team. They should be very proud of themselves. I think there are actually really interesting things that are happening in regulated markets. There's something really interesting going on in pharma right now, because I think the rate of innovation has massively slowed in pharma, and there's lots to say about, will AI pick it up, back up again, etc., etc. It hasn't yet, but because of this problem of the pharma industry has basically hit a point where lots of generics are going to come to market, and the rate of innovation is slowing, so there are fewer blockbuster drugs coming to the market. Thinking there are big organisations out there like Novartis, who are 100,000 people worldwide, really thinking about how do they redo the way that they get research done. That's pretty brave, right? If you think about that, is 6-year-old legacy tech, loads of literal white coats, talking about their expertise, going, do you know what, there may be a different way to do this, to speed up our knowledge and to speed up our rate of success. I think that's quite astonishing, actually, given all the things that we know about those kinds of organisations and those kinds of people or personas in organisations, to be brave enough to go, do you know what, there is probably a better way of doing this. And they are, tentative first steps. There's lots of interesting things to think about there. But I think organisations like that, who are being brave enough to question the way things have always been done around here, that's where we'll start to see success.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think it's easy to think that startups or the latest in tech are the ones that are driving this kind of process, but actually some of these legacy brands are starting to realise the benefits too, and starting to steer the course of the ship slightly.
Yeah. But even if I think the term legacy brand is really interesting. Facebook's really old now. You know,
Yeah,
like
that's true. Yeah.
we obviously weren't there at the beginning of Facebook because we were way too young for that. But
Way too young.
but it's an old brand now. We have this idea that these startups, as we like to call them, are not legacy, but they are. They're 20 years old. That's a lifetime, a literal lifetime for some people who are 20. And so I think it's really interesting this kind of, again, it's a language thing that we got really obsessed with, this idea of the cult of the startup. I don't know how relevant that is anymore. I think we've got to let go of some of our own hype.
Yeah, especially given nervous systems. I think that it's been a real shock to that type of model, hasn't there? That was once held up as being the sort of future and the only answer. But actually, a lot of that has been shaken up by nervous systems and the constant permacrisis that they face. Yeah, great point.
Most liberating. So, in sort of 10 years working inside some of these organisations, the very, very best idea, and it was the most liberating thought. Innocent Drinks. I think it'd been around for a long time. I think it probably came from the founders, but sort of, are you 70% sure? That was the question that was asked to everyone through the organisation. And if you really think about that question, it immediately changes your relationship with certainty and uncertainty, and makes it okay to go, do you know what? I'm not 100% at all, but I'm 70%, so let's do it. Now, that are you 70% sure? That could be applied to product innovation, business decisions, strategic decisions. It's a relevant question all the way through the organisation, and it was the question that was asked most frequently, and it was just a really simple question and mechanism, and it just changes it like that. So that would be the very best thing that I've ever seen when it comes to uncertainty.
And then that's all stories of leaders, right? What leaders do, and when they celebrate. We were having this conversation at Coffee before. What if you lived in a world where leaders celebrated the things that didn't work, or the things that they stopped because they found out really early that it wasn't going to work? In fact, that's a much better story. I did 2 weeks worth of work. We figured out this isn't the thing that we should be doing, and I stopped it, and that was celebrated. You know, even maybe financially celebrated, because you could probably calculate how much money you've saved by not continuing on that piece of work. That would completely change the way that the organisation thinks about risk. I think that there could be some really interesting experiments done.
And progress as well, because progress is treated as linear. Like, can we get this from here to here? You know, that's progress. But actually, progress could be non-linear. To go, we're not doing that. We're going over here.
Yeah. And these were the most important things we learned that everybody should know.
Yeah.
That's value.
Love it. We could talk about this for hours, couldn't we, guys? But I think on that note, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Joe and Emily. That was absolutely fascinating. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Not at all. It's been great.